The Mystery of Cabin Island, Chapter 14. It's called Chimney Top Discovery. And if you'll remember when we left off, Chet had fallen asleep while guarding Mr. Jefferson, and he woke up when he realized that somebody was standing near him. As Chet shouted, the intruder streaked across the cabin and out the door, which was swinging wide open. "Help, fellows!" Chet bounced out of his chair, heart thumping with excitement, and dashed wildly in pursuit. But by the time he reached the doorway, the figure was already disappearing into the woods. "What's up?" cried Frank as he burst into the room. Joe and Biff were close at his heels. "Somebody was in here," Chet said, shivering as the wind whipped into the cabin. "I drowsed off, and when I woke up, the guy was standing right in front of me. He ran down the hill." "It may be a ruse to get us out of the house," Frank said. He and Joe hastily pulled on their parkas and boots. "Chet, you and Biff stay on guard. He may try to circle back." Rushing outside, the Hardys quickly spotted the intruder's tracks, clear boot prints in the thin layer of fresh snow that had fallen during the night. They followed the trail down the wooded slope. "He headed across the ice," Joe exclaimed as they reached the shore. Pressing forward, the Hardy boys strained their eyes to peer through the gray dawn mist, but it was not light enough for them to see the fugitive. "His tracks lead toward the mainland," Frank observed. "Come on." As the young sleuths crossed the frozen cove, they found that the snowy prints were more widely spaced. "Uh-oh," said Joe. "He started running here." When the brothers reached the mainland, breathing heavily, they exchanged looks of disappointment. The trail ended at a place where tire prints showed a car had been parked. "That fellow didn't waste any time," Frank exclaimed in chagrin. "He must have had a big lead on us, or we'd have heard the motor." "I guess we may as well go back," Joe said. The two trudged across the ice. The sun was rising as they hiked up the slope to the cabin. Inside, a fire was blazing, and Chet, Biff, and Mr. Jefferson sat in front of it drinking hot cocoa. "No luck," Joe said, and reported what they had found. "Fellows, I'm sorry I let you down," Chet said sheepishly. "I dozed off and never knew the guy was in here until the door banged against the wall. He must have left it unlatched and the wind blew it open." "That's okay, Chet," said Frank. "What did he look like?" "Well, I was too scared to notice except that he was big. Besides, he was facing the fireplace. I don't think it was the ghost, though," Chet added, "because he didn't have on white." "Could have been Hanley," Frank remarked. "It must have been," Chet admitted. "He's still interested in the fireplace," Frank observed. "But why?" Mr. Jefferson asked. "I built this place. Nothing's in the fireplace." Frank hesitated, unwilling to raise the old gentleman's hopes. "Well, that remains to be seen. Is there a chisel here?" "Yes," Chet replied, "in the toolbox in the kitchen." He hastened out and returned at once with the tool. Despite the heat, Frank stepped close to the fireplace with the chisel and pried at the stones, hoping to find one that moved. Meanwhile, Joe brought a ladder from the kitchen and climbed up to test the chimney rocks, which Frank could not reach. "No use," Joe finally admitted. "They're cemented in tight." Frank agreed. "If there's a loose stone, it might be outside. Let's take a look." Chet cooked breakfast while the other boys were gone. The wind was blowing hard as the trio carried the ladder around the end of the cabin to the chimney. "Let's check the bottom first," Frank said. This time Joe used the chisel as they poked and pushed at each of the large stones. Biff shook his head. "No luck there." "I'll go up on the roof and examine the chimney," Joe said. Biff and Frank lifted the ladder and placed it beside the chimney. The legs sank into the snow and slid on the ice beneath, so that the boys had to brace the ladder with their feet to keep it from falling. "You two'll have to be my anchor man," Joe said. He put the chisel into his pocket, and as Biff and Frank leaned their weight against the ladder, he climbed to the roof. Joe crawled onto the edge and stood up gingerly. The heat from the fire below had melted the surrounding snow, and the wet shingles were slippery. Joe made his way around the chimney, testing each stone patiently with his chisel, but none was loose. As he rested a moment, Joe noticed a fragment of yellow material caught between two stones just inside the chimney top. Squinting against the smoke, Joe reached in and worked the material loose. With watering eyes, he stuffed it into his pocket and turned his face away. After a few moments, his vision cleared and he could see the entire island below, blanketed in white. Suddenly, his glance was caught by a dark patch ringed by tall rocks on the brow of the cliff. As he stared at it, the wind suddenly cut sharp across his face and showered him with snow from the roof. Half blinded, he felt his way around the chimney to the ladder. "Be careful," Frank called, but the wind whipped the words away. The next moment Joe slipped and he fell with a cry. Instinctively, he grabbed for a rung and caught it. The ladder skidded at the jolt, and the boys below struggled to hold it steady. Shakily, Joe climbed down. "Oh, thanks," he gasped, reaching the ground. Buffeted by the wind, the three boys made their way back into the cabin. "Any luck?" Mr. Jefferson asked as they took off their parkas. "I found this inside the chimney," said Joe, and took the piece of yellow material from his pocket. "It's a piece of tape measure," Frank exclaimed. "See, it's marked 1 inch." "It was stuck tight," Joe said. "Someone must have torn the tape trying to pull it loose. But why measure the inside of the chimney?" "Maybe the person thinks the loose stone is in the chimney lining," Mr. Jefferson suggested. "You mean there are 2 layers?" Biff asked, surprised. "Yes. My stonemason insisted on a lined chimney as a safety measure." Then he added, "What makes you so sure there is something hidden in the chimney?" "Oh, we're not certain," Frank confessed. "We suspect it because of Hanley's interest in the fireplace, but for all we know, he may be on the wrong track." "We must crack the code," Joe declared. "That will probably give us the answer." "Not before breakfast," Chet said firmly. "I'm about to make the pancakes." He hurried to the kitchen and a short time later served stacks of golden brown cakes with a pitcher of hot maple syrup and a platter of spicy sausages. "Chet, you have redeemed yourself," Joe exclaimed between mouthfuls. "This hits the spot after our early morning exercise." Mr. Jefferson was quiet during most of the meal. Finally he said, "Do you know, it has just occurred to me that Sparewell mentioned a relative named Hanley." Frank asked eagerly, "What did he say about him?" "It was so long ago I can't remember," Mr. Jefferson replied. "That may be an important clue," Joe exclaimed. "Perhaps Johnny stumbled onto the connection somehow and decided to start trailing Hanley." "Yes," Frank went on, "if Johnny was determined to solve the puzzle of your missing medals, he may have dug up information about Sparewell's past and learned the names of relatives. Then, when Hanley showed up at your home, Johnny had his chance to follow him." "It's all supposition," Mr. Jefferson said with a sigh. "What we need are facts." "Well, speaking of facts," said Joe, "are there hot springs on this island, Mr. Jefferson?" The man looked at him in amazement. "Hot springs? Certainly not. My goodness, Joe, whatever made you ask that?" "Oh," Joe mumbled vaguely, "nothing. Just an idea." But his eyes met Frank's and the older boy bit back a grin. "Nothing my foot," he said to himself. "Joe's got a clue."